First episode of 2022 of IMPAKT TV, this time with Rafaël Rozendaal, sitting next to me. My name is Michelle and I'm sitting here with Arjen Dunnewind, Director of IMPAKT. For those who watch for the first time, IMPAKT is a center for media culture in Utrecht, and we focus on the relation between society, media, technology and the arts. And IMPAKT TV is our monthly series of events in which we invite a special guest to reflect and talk with us about the latest news in art and culture. We broadcast this every month on Planet Impact, online where you're now, and this is our virtual building for our online events at IMPAKT, and we invite you after the live stream to explore the different floors. So under the live stream you find a button to ask questions, so throughout the event you are very welcome to ask questions through the chat or by sending an email to questions@impact.nl. For both options there is a button under the live stream, and then you will find extra content, and on the top floor, on the rooftop, a Zoom bar where we invite you to have a virtual drink and after talk with us after the event. And something else you might have noticed in the let's say interface of Planet Impact is the colors of a flag. It's the 8th day today that we are following the horrible events in Ukraine, and we are very worried and shocked about everything that has happened. Like many other institutions in the Netherlands, we are organizing activities to support the victims of the war in Ukraine. So all the income from tonight's event will be donated to Giro 555, Giro 555 in Dutch. I don't know what's the international one, but it's all going to support the people in Ukraine. And you will see QR code now. Here you can also donate if you like, but also if you scroll down on the page you will find the link, and my colleague is putting it in the chat. And yeah, without further ado, I think let's go to our guest.
Thanks Michelle, and our special guest for this first episode of IMPAKT TV 2022 is Rafaël Rozendaal, born in 1980, Dutch-Brazilian artist. You grew up in Amsterdam and The Hague, then went to the Art Academy in The Hague and Maastricht, and now you're living and working in New York. And one of the things that people might know you of is that you're the inventor, so to say, of the bring your own beamer concept, and we'll briefly go into that also in the interview that will follow. Also, you're one of the first artists to develop the internet as a place to work, to make art with, to sell website as art objects. And now you're very much at the forefront of the whole NFT as an art medium development. We're looking at a few examples here. You selected 15 NFT works for us. During the show we can watch these works. We'll also discuss them in the interview. As Michelle already announced, feel free to send us questions or comments for Rafaël. We'll share them with you, with him, and discuss them. So part of tonight's event has been pre-recorded. We'll switch to the pre-record, then we'll be back with you and with Rafaël to take your questions. So I hope you'll enjoy the following interview with Rafaël. Welcome also Rafaël here in our little studio.
Hello.
I'm here with Michelle, my colleague, and very happy to have you for the first broadcast of IMPAKT TV in the new season as our special guest. And we're very happy and surprised that you were able to be here in the Netherlands, which is not your home, because you live in New York. But of course you've been raised in the Netherlands. Maybe to start with, I'm very curious, we'll go into depth in your work, and our audience can see it on the monitor there. Maybe you could position yourself a little bit when it comes to how you see your art in relation to other art genres. What have been your inspirations? I mean, you could think of your work of abstract art, minimal art, conceptual. Maybe you relate to those terms but don't really affiliate with them. Please take us with...
Yeah, I think the main thing for me is, the way I started is that I wanted to make things and be as free as possible. So I've always felt a lot of energy. So I think my work is a lot about energy. And I started in high school taking pictures of bands or doing comic books, and it was always art that I wanted to spread. So it was something I would use a Xerox machine or copy things and spread them around. And then as soon as I went to art school, I was always interested in moving image and stop motion animation. And I grew up, my father is an abstract painter, but I also love television. So I always think I'm somewhere between Mondrian and Mickey Mouse. That's kind of my world. I was interested in moving image, but not so much in story. So I always thought, when I looked at the history of animation, I saw that animators all have a signature, and the signature is in the walk of the character. It's not necessarily a still, but it's like the way they move. That's, you could say that's that animator, that's that animator. And then even as a child, I imagined these looping animated characters that would just float on the wall. That was my dream, just to make a moving painting that just exists on the wall. Always interested in movement, so it grew out of that. And then in art school, trying all kinds of things, and the internet came up, and that combined my energy for making and my energy for spreading. So I thought, oh, it's amazing you can make something that anyone in the world can see at any time without having to wait for the permission of a publisher or a TV network or a museum. I was highly convinced that anyone in a museum would ever like my work. I thought that's all very serious, and when you're 17 you don't feel like Joseph Beuys. You don't feel like I have to carry the burden of the entire planet. And so I just started making things, and they started spreading online. And I think the first few works were very overtly comical, and I was using humor. Also, in a way, I was interested in something very funny can be just as serious as something serious. Like they're both a part of the human experience. And I was always convinced that things that come out of you without too much thinking are more sincere. So I was interested in exploring things without knowing why. So I felt if I have an urge and I want to make it, then that must mean something. I don't have to wonder what it means. It's the fact that the urge is there. That's what attracted me. And so as time went on, every year I made a certain number of works. It slowly went to abstraction, partly because I have a history with abstraction in museums and my father and growing up that way, and partly going to an essence. So I was making moving images, and I would choose a subject and I would animate that subject. So, for example, I have a website with a Jell-O dessert, and you touch it and it starts to wobble. But at some point, I'm interested in the wobbling and not in the dessert. And so as time went on, for me, works are visual thinking. So you're thinking, and you know how you think, and you get to one conclusion and it leads to another question. So whatever you're thinking about, you realize like, oh, that's the way that works. And because you know that, then new questions open up. And so that's how I see art. I'll research something, I'll do a study on what does it feel like when you're in the train and you see the Dutch landscape rolling by. So you see all these lines in linear perspective moving, things far away are smaller, things nearby are bigger, these very basic observations. And then you condense that into one work, and you're like, okay, well what happens if I flip that, if I negate perspective? So that's the next question. And what happens when I use colors that negate the perspective, but the scale emphasizes the perspective? And so every time it's like another thought built on the previous thought. So I see my work as very theoretical in that sense, that almost like a scientist is dissecting reality and reducing it to diagrams. That's how I see my work. So it's very diagrammatic. It all starts with line drawing. So my process is that I find it hard to find ideas when I'm on a computer, because a computer is a distraction machine. So the best way for me to find ideas is just a paper sketchbook with a pen, and I try to. The hardest thing I think for any artist is to let go of importance, because if you, at least for me, if you say, okay, right now, let's come up with the most important thought of all time, then I get stuck. But if I just freely start drawing, then maybe after an hour something good will come out of it, maybe not. But it's very important to be patient. So you can compare it to fishing, and if you're impatient, you're not going to catch any fish. So you should enjoy the fact that you're there for a few hours. And then those diagrams are diagrams of movement or thoughts about movement or composition. And I always like the tension between figuration and abstraction, and the tension between stillness and movement. So I like being on the edge of the two, where there's a little bit of movement. The movement is so slow that if you would glance by, you think it's a still image. And also the abstraction, because there's movement, there's a hint of what it is. There's a figuration. But maybe if it was a still, you would think it was totally abstract. So I like the tension. Am I seeing something, or am I seeing, is it three-dimensional or is it two-dimensional? Is it representing anything? Is it referring to anything? And I'm interested in that tension.
Mm-hmm.
And then more recently, you got into the NFT scene, let's say. The first NFT you made a year and a half ago, 2021, so quite recently, and got quite popular already in the scene.
Much to my surprise. Yeah.
Can you tell a little bit what did you find there, and how did you get there?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, I had been making art online since 1999, and in 2000 I registered the first domain name, and I started using domain names for each work. So the idea for me was that digital works can have a permanence, because late 90s, early 2000s, across the creative field, everybody was experimenting online, but nobody gave it a stamp of permanence. So an architecture firm, a design office, a musician, everybody had a website, and it would have a section called experiments. And they all had audio-visual experiments, and I see Arjen smiling, he remembers. Everybody was doing experiments online. It was very cool, but nobody gave it value. And value sounds superficial, you know, it's money, why do we talk about it when we're talking about art? But if you don't give it any value as the creator, it disappears, and then it's gone, and there's no memory, and we can't. So with the domain names, I was trying to give these works value, not necessarily for selling, that happened much later, but just the gesture saying, this is not a sketch, but this is a work. And you know, the domain name is not expensive, but I have to maintain it, so it's a dedication, saying I want this work to exist forever. And so the domain names were my system for 20 years, and I was very happy with it. I like the domain names you can remember, and it's a human phrase. You can say, okay, I'll go to google.com, it's easy. And the blockchain came along, and I thought, yeah, I understand blockchain, but I don't know which blockchain will be the real standard. And it all sounds a bit like investment more than art. And so I was suspicious and skeptic, but everyone kept saying, give it a try. You know, I think it's going to become something. I was like, no, it's too nerdy, it's user unfriendly. I don't know about all these crypto bros, and a lot of prejudice. And then finally, it just started building momentum, and some friends were trying it, and I said, okay, I'll try it. And then it was kind of a shock. It sold for a lot of money, and I actually got kind of scared because the amounts are so public, and I didn't want to be a target, and I didn't want the work to be only seen through that lens. But I just went along with it, and now it sort of calmed down. But I think basically I had been working on selling digital works and giving them permanence, but the selling was still analog. So it was through a gallery, and we would make a paper certificate and transfer the domain name. And it needed that final touch that the viewing experience and the owning experience are at the same moment. And that was what NFT brought. And people often say falling into NFT is like going into a warm bath. It's like, oh, this is nice. So that's how it felt. It's like, oh, this is a good fit. And yeah.
What makes this bath so warm? Is it the community? Is it the ease? Maybe
yeah,
tell a bit more about that.
I think there's many aspects, but to me the foundation of it all is that after 25, 30 years of internet culture, we are admitting that internet culture has value. And right now it's blockchain, and maybe later there'll be another mechanism, but I was always convinced that we have such a deeply emotional human connection with the internet, and it's very human to want to connect with certain cultural moments and want to preserve them and own them. And I think throughout history, many people have said, I love this moment in culture, I want to own this piece of music, I want to own this book, and it's dear to me and I want to hold on to it. And I think there's something to be said for a completely different way of art history where artworks disappear, and like sand paintings or oratory history, and that model can exist as well. But I grew up in an art history that's very much connected around preserving objects and learning from them and then making the next step. So we are raised with this narrative of the history of art where society develops in a certain way and art moves along with it, and through that we can see a history, and that history exists because of ownership. And ownership is always problematic. There are ups and downs, and sometimes the ownership is more egalitarian, and sometimes the ownership is connected to religion, and sometimes the ownership is connected to military power. There's all kinds of ownership, but I think it's a very human trait to want to own things and to want to distill things into an object and to preserve it. And I think blockchain is the first moment to make that possible at scale. So the domain names were a way to do it, but it wasn't really scalable. It was a bit cumbersome, and I know in software, ease of use is everything. Like photo sharing existed before Instagram. You had Flickr, you had FTP, you could export a photo album from Photoshop and then put it on your own server. People were doing that, but it took the ease of use of Instagram to really connect it with hashtags, and boom. And blockchain is this moment for ownership. Like, I think so many people said, wow, I love this meme so much. This meme means so much to me, but I don't even know who made it. And all of a sudden there was the lineage, the provenance. It started with this person, and this is the authentic certificate. And
do you see really a change there? Like I don't know, that NFT as a medium, as a possibilities are also really bringing, opening up a complete new way of sharing, of making, of selling,
well,
of showing.
From my perspective, I was always making websites, and much to my surprise from the beginning, there was a large audience. And so I would see the audience, and I didn't connect with the audience as much as I think now. It felt like I had built this audience that to me was completely unknown. And now with NFT, especially now that I make fractionalized works that are more affordable, I get a lot of feedback from people like, I've been following your work for so long and I've always wanted to own one of your works, but there wasn't a way. And now I feel much more connected to that audience. So the most positive spin for me, and in my experience, is that there is this audience that I've built a long-term relationship with that now has a better way of connecting with me. But that's not for every artist. Not every artist wants to make fractionalized works or wants to make works continually online. There's other artists who prefer to make works very slowly outside of any form of media and then show it in a gallery exhibition and then be quiet for another 2 years. So it depends on the character of the artist.
Maybe another, I was just pointing to the work that is on the monitor, which is Deep Blue, one of your NFT works. Maybe another important quality of the NFTs is that it takes out, so to say, the middleman, the curator, the gatekeeper. In the opening words you said that you never thought that anyone would like your art.
No. I thought museums would never like my art.
Yeah, that's... sorry. And also in some of your texts, you comment on this structure of gatekeepers, curators, museums, and
cities,
if you
the
do it
biennial
properly,
class,
then you climb up that ladder, but it's a very hard climb. And that entire infrastructure is now becoming redundant. At least that's the promise or the buzz around.
It's a promise. And so traditionally, I don't know, nobody knows the exact history of music because a lot of it wasn't recorded. But when recorded music started, all of a sudden, a more grassroots, lower class form of music started spreading and started being solidified in recordings, where before only the higher form of music, the opera, would be recorded forever. Recorded in the sense that there was architecture specific for the music would be annotated, it would be written into the history books, the canon. So music had the canon, it had a top-down structure that decides what is good and what is bad, who's in and who's out. And the record player and the radio subverted that. And I'm pretty sure when electronic music, recorded music started, that most high-end musician temples said, recorded music is not music. Real music happens in the opera house, where fashion and architecture and storytelling and lighting and musicianship are all at the top level, and it's all perfect in harmony. And it is a special form, but then I'm pretty sure the first recordings were awful in quality, and people said, oh, this will never get anywhere. And just slowly, it starts getting better, And then what happened was, the recording artists started building their own venues, or started finding their own ways. They're going to play in stadiums. So they don't play in the opera house, they play in a stadium. So I think what we're seeing now is, maybe we'll just talk in 25 years and see if it was true or not. Maybe it's all trash culture, it's all disposable, it's all crap, and it's gone, and it was a bubble, and bye-bye. And maybe this is a moment where a lot of people who didn't feel they had any permission to make art start making art. People that were excluded for many different reasons. They just felt like their personality didn't fit in the temple of art, of museums or any other, or biennials. Because there's a lot of personality types that don't feel at home in the seriousness of the art world. But they're interested in visual expression. And so I think it's too early to say what NFT is, but I think, to me, this is a paradigm shift similar to recorded music. And recorded music to this day has such an immense impact on how we feel, how we grow up, how you feel, how you fall in love, how you connect to heartbreak, things like that, things that the opera doesn't offer. I don't think it really offers that. And so I love the opera, I love classical music, but I don't think it changes culture. In the same way, museums are interesting, but they don't really change culture. And I think NFT has a potential to really open up visual autonomous expression to a wider audience of people making it, and to a wider audience of people seeing it. So, and I think physical manifestations will come out of it. There will be festivals, there will be venues, there will be NFT-specific museums. So I don't see it as a danger to the museum, but as a shift. Mm-hmm. I feel like I'm so invested in it that I've always been making digital art that I'm always going to defend it. So don't trust my opinion. It's like if you ask someone who makes shoes, like, are shoes important? Yes, of course, shoes are the most important. Without shoes, we are nothing. So I'm always going to defend digital art and accessibility because it fits me. But I'm biased. Maybe some other, there's many lenses. You could say the peak of painting was in the 17th century and Vermeer and that kind of thing, and everything was downhill from then on. And so it's very easy every time culture moves on to say it's all trash. Oh, all these modern painters, they don't know how to paint realistically, it's trash. oh, all these video artists, they don't even know how to paint, it's trash. And now you have the NFT, and it's all crap and trash too. And then you'll see 25 years later, it's like, oh, there were a couple of unknown artists using NFT in a subversive way. We didn't notice, but it was an interesting moment in culture. And oh, these people were making custom smart contracts connected to performances, and these people were making monochrome NFTs that changed with the time of the day, and these people, and if you start digging, it's very similar to net art in the beginning. I did some lectures and I would show my favorite web pages, and people are like, how do you find this stuff? All I found is click-through banners so I think it's so big and massive that there's good stuff in there, but I started this platform BYOB, so it's Bring Your Own Beamer. The idea was, it was my approach to curation, and it's more decentralized. So the idea is you find a space and you invite artists that you like, and you ask even more people can come that are not invited, and everybody brings a projector and shows work. Yeah. So it's not very precisely curated, it's more about energy. And so I always say it's compared more to a thrift store than to a high-end boutique. So you have to dig around a little bit, and there's a lot of crap and there's a few gems, but it's a more active role for the viewer, where the museum, you trust the tastemakers to only show you the best of the best. And I think NFT is a space where you have to dig around and do a bit of curation yourself. And I think it's an alternative. I don't think it's a threat. I think it's an alternative. So you can go to MoMA and know that every work is vetted, it's part of the canon, but it's also a bit safe. Like, oh, you go to a space where everything is good.
But if I look at you and your work, I mean, there's also, you have on your website the art is, and then one of them says art comes from solitary curiosity, and maybe it's about the solitary element of this statement, also connecting it to the Bring Your Own Beamer, and many of the examples that you give, I think you like the concentration of being in a very controlled environment and enjoying the art that you see there. And then the Bring Your Own Beamer is maybe the opposite, and you explained the qualities of this melting pot where good and bad.
Chaotic.
Yeah, the thrift shop. So I would like to also maybe discuss that a bit in the light of what Brian Eno is explaining, the seniors and the genius. Where do you see yourself? What do you see most important also in the framework of the NFT movement? Is it the scenes, or is it the individual geniuses, or should we no longer see it in this dichotomy?
For me, to make my work, I need silence. And I've tried all kinds of things, but I actually, the first 10 years, the websites that I made, at some point I wrote down any point where I came up with the idea. So I made a popcorn website, and I remember I was with my girlfriend at the time. She was making popcorn and we were waiting for it, and I was like, oh, that would make an interesting work, just the sound of this popcorn. And then I know sitting in the train, and the only thread I could find between all the places where I found ideas was boredom. And so I found that when there's boredom, when at some point you're forced, the only way to entertain yourself is to come up with a new idea, that's for me the most productive mode of being. So that's what I mean with this solitary curiosity, where you're just really in your own thoughts. And it's quite hard to find because the world is so stimulating and exciting at all times, and maybe also there's a whole industry that asks for your attention at every second. So you really have to resist this. But then the real energy from BYOB was all these people making works by themselves and then coming together. And to me, that's more interesting than just people coming together without sharing their work, which is normal, like going dancing. And I don't go out that much. But this idea of all these people who sort of know each other online, but they've all been in their cocoons, and then you come together, that is very powerful to me, because you've revealed the result of your creative process, and then you see each other and you're like, oh, I've been following your work for a long time, I didn't know it was you. Oh, and the relationships that came out of that were very interesting. And it was very apparent from the first BYOB, everybody said, oh, this is so fun, which is something, exhibitions tend to be a lot of things, but you never hear the word fun. It's usually quite stressful. And BYOB to me was this spontaneous way of embracing the digital, that the digital is not so precious, so you're not worried that someone, you know, when you hang a work, you don't want it to get damaged, you need insurance, all these things, and that takes away from the energy. And so I think this idea of making things by yourself and then getting together and getting energized, that's the contrast that worked for me.
You drew a parallel with the music industry, which also made me think of another comparison that you made to punk music.
Yeah.
And the last thing I thought of looking at your work was punk music. So maybe you take us with us in what you, maybe your inspirations there, share us with your favorites maybe, but also how it feeds the way you see your own work.
Well, the thing I liked about youth culture is this idea that you have a strong urge and you don't even know what it is yet, but you feel like you have to do something. So I think you learn in later life to talk very well and explain why you do things and to convince other people and to justify things. But I'm interested in this early stage where you're just like, it has to happen. You just feel this urge. I want this idea to exist. I want it to have a form. I want it to happen without justifying it all. It's just, why did you do it? I don't know. It had to happen. I felt that it had to happen. So that's what I like about punk music, that you're not a trained musician and you don't follow a previous composer, or you don't have to be a master at something. You just feel like you have to do something, and it's that energy that I'm interested in. And besides that, I think the simplicity of power chords and building a song and making these anthemic lyrics that are very easy to remember, that's something that appealed to me. It's reducing something.
And maybe also seeing it as an art form that anyone can do. Does your work on the computer have the same simplicity as the guitar?
That's a bit
punk?
questionable, because I met a programmer when I was in art school, Reinier Feijen, he lives in Rotterdam, and we've been working together for 22 years, so the programming is quite sophisticated. Mm-hmm. It's not that punk in that sense that what he's helping me doing things I couldn't do on my own, but I just found that adding the element of randomness and programming and dynamic compositions that do different things at different scales, I found that so interesting, and it was a good collaboration. So yeah, that's not that punk. Yeah.
And can you imagine your practice involving, I mean, there's famous artists having studios with 20 people animating for them or doing whatever. No. It's just you and your assistant or coder in Rotterdam doing the work.
Yeah, and I never wanted to scale up. I've made physical works that I work together with a photo lab or a weaving factory, and I love the exchange of knowledge. So, for example, the textile factory in Tilburg, the textile museum, you work together with an expert and you find a way to make the work, but I wouldn't want to be in control I wouldn't want my own studio with a weaving machine, because it obligates me to do that and I would feel less free. So I think the more people you hire, someone said, when you hire people, the company becomes a beast and you have to feed the beast. The beast starts saying, what should I do? And you're like, well, today I want to be bored and not think about anything and not be practical. But what should I do? What should I do? And so I'm very weary of adding too much of that structure to my practice. And it's also not necessary. I feel like I can do a pretty large output on my own. So that's something that's always a point of tension in my head.
Between probably this concentration and also all the possibilities that the internet is offering, and also especially when using maybe this algorithm that also generate variations as with NFTs. Yeah,
but maybe that's a good question. One of the things that's unique about the blockchain is that it's immutable, that the nature of a computer is that you change stuff all the time. So when you make a website, you come from being a cultural institution before the internet, so you would make catalogs, there would be a deadline, and if there's a typo in the catalog, it's there forever. And you get it from the printer and you see all the mistakes. With a website, you say, hey, here's a mistake, let's fix it. Here's a mistake, let's fix it. So it's in the nature of net art to be able to change things later. And then the blockchain, even the programming language is called Solidity. So it's solid. You put something on the blockchain, and if you want to own something, you don't want the creator to all of a sudden change it. There are ways, but for me the interesting point with these fractionalized works is that you make one algorithm, and then different people own different permutations of the same algorithm. So one owns the blue one owns the red one owns the green one, etc. And I found that makes it much more visceral and relatable what programming is. That they can see, okay, this algorithm can make 1,000 choices, and because there's ownership to it, you start looking more intently. So if you see a single work that has a randomness aspect and it's just calculating random things on a wall, you could still think it's a video. But because there's all these permutations, the CryptoPunks are a good example. Like, whatever you think of it, it's a good way of showing what programming can do. Like, they made an algorithm that generated 10,000 discernible faces. And that's very hard to do with a pen and just a few pixels as a human being. So they needed programming for that.
But then especially in such a work, you start thinking like then it is almost more about the programming language and about the fact of it being a blockchain than maybe the artwork itself. Well,
the artwork is testing the medium. So it's saying, what can we do with blockchain that we couldn't do with computers before? Because maybe before, if you would have done the CryptoPunks before blockchain, it would have been a monitor that kept making new faces. And you'd be like, wow, these are so many faces. But now, because you say there's 10,000 of them and there's this game of ownership around it, you start saying, why is that face more valuable than that face? And it creates this emotional connection of a community. So whatever you think of it, it's just a new form. And I think that's, to me, the permutations are a way that people create more of an emotional connection of decisions of an algorithm. I think it makes the algorithm more relatable.
One thing also that I read in interviews is that you like limitations, the limitations of technology.
Yeah.
You also like haikus. Is that a similar kind of very fixed structure that you need to fit in? Could you tell a bit more about the limitations in your net art, that of the blockchain maybe, of that of your website works, and maybe how that relates to the limitation that a haiku poses?
It's something about certain borders of possibilities that then, to me, become a question that I can answer. So I remember having a workshop at school in Macromedia Flash, that was the animation programming tool, and I had used After Effects, and After Effects you make a fixed timeline and you say my project is 3 minutes. So that's the normal way of filmmaking, is saying, well, how long is your film and what's the size of it? It's for TV, it's 520, 762 something. It's HD, it's 1920. There's a fixed size, and how long is a movie? About an hour and a half. That's how you think about it. And then Flash comes along, it's like, how long is a movie? Well, it's infinite. But there are all these different timelines. And so to me, that was almost like a movie is one reality that moves from 0 minutes to 90 minutes. And a Flash animation has all these different universes running independently. And you can make a pause and a play button in each little animation that runs independently. And that was the kind of problem that triggered a lot of thoughts in me, thinking like, oh, so you can have sunshine over there and rain over there at the same moment, but they could also reverse in time. And it's just a fascinating idea, and also the idea that there's no fixed size to a website, that it scales to different ratios. it's something that I thought, okay, if a composition is liquid, how do you deal with how you divide things in the total composition? It's almost like you write a song, but you don't know beforehand how long it is, so where do you put the notes? And that's the type of problem where I'm like, that just activates my brain. And with haiku specifically, it was I read some classic Japanese haiku, and they're like an algorithm. They're 3 lines of code, and you read it, and they're very visual. All of a sudden, you see the famous the frog jumps in the old pond and the sound of water. And I had dealt so much with software deterioration or physical objects breaking or screens breaking, and I was interested in poetry that there is no deterioration. Every time you read it, it moves with the time, because our brains are updated, and it's... So I found it to be the most worry-free, the most, in that sense, a very pure idea, and that's what interested me. But at the same time, I don't know why, I love the restrictions. It makes it easier for me. Yeah.
Maybe to finish this interview with, I'd like to call on you again as our tour guide in this new world of the NFTs. You already explained that you could very well imagine there being NFT museums and festivals, so there probably will be a new infrastructure of some kinds. What can you tell about the structure that's already there? There are NFT auction websites, so there is some kind of an infrastructure, and maybe where people could go to see more NFTs, maybe some artists that you feel could be interesting, and how then would you see this developing in an alternative but still art infrastructure?
I think the middle people are needed to bring some structure, because it's the biggest marketplace of NFTs is called OpenSea, and I think for a lot of people it felt like you fell out of the boat and you can't see the horizon, and you just have to swim. Yeah, it's like, oh, how do I get home? Because I really don't know where I am. That's how NFT feels to a lot of people. I tend to follow NFT artists that are friends of mine. Yeah. So people who came out of the post-internet scene, who also started doing NFTs, and then next to them you see another work and like, oh, that's interesting, you start to follow them. So it's a bit like Instagram in that sense, that you follow your interests. And I have found a lot of interesting works, but they were often by people that I was already following. So.
But if OpenSeas is a website that makes you feel lost, what would be websites that have a maybe more distinct style to it, or a certain community?
I think I'm the wrong person to ask, because I have this obsession with production, and I feel like consumption of data gets in the way of production. So I don't follow anyone on Twitter or Instagram. I had to just take that off, and I even have software on my computer to close off most internet access most of the day. So I get 30 minutes of social media per day, roughly. I try to keep the internet out of my brain so I can make things.
On the internet.
Yeah. But I don't have a clear answer, but I mean, I like Takeshi Murata and Austin Lee, and off the top of my head, those two come to mind. Okay.
Put the links in the
but
chat.
I can say that for an artist like Takeshi, we did a cross interview for a publication. We talked together, and he was saying he's done a lot of exciting shows at really great institutions, but there was just no way to make a living off of it. And and he's shown in really great institutions, and you get an exhibition fee, but that's not enough to live off of. And this is the first year where he's like, people are really buying the moving image. It's not the box, not the installation, the actual moving image. And all of a sudden, he was always at a disadvantage because he's a specialist in moving image. Mm-hmm. You know, it's the art world accepts moving images somewhat. And now all of a sudden, people love moving image, and they're like, we want more of this. Can you make more? We love it. And so that's what I mean with the warm bath. It's like all of a sudden, you're not the weird stepchild. You're like, oh no, let's go. Yeah.
thanks. We're going to move to the Q&A. Sorry?
With these warm, dark words we close off. Welcome back to the live broadcast of IMPAKT TV. So much food for thought, Rafael. We have a lot of questions. We are also getting questions from the audience. Also, if you have questions, please send them in through questions@impact.nl or through the chat. But let's start with the first one. Arjan.
Yeah, well, it's not so much a question that I have, but we can talk a bit about what we have here on the monitor. Rafael, you selected 15 NFT works for us, like made in the last 2 years, so it gives us some kind of an idea what you've been doing the last 2 years. For instance, what is the title? Well, we just switched to a new work. Tell us what is the title. Maybe you tell a bit about how you make these kinds of works.
Well, first of all, it's a square monitor, which is kind of rare. So
hard to get also the square monitor.
Yeah, and it's an unconventional. I guess it doesn't work well for most workflows. So most monitors are not square, but I think the square format became popular in NFT because it's further from entertainment and cinema. Mm-hmm. So what format can you choose? And maybe standing portrait format. Is a bit like TikTok, and landscape is a bit like cinema, and then NFT is this weird thing in between. So for years I had been making works that adapt to any screen size, and then the NFT came along and video was preferred, and I thought that's an interesting thing to focus on squares for 1 or 2 years. Mm-hmm. So all my compositions before were adaptive, and now they're fixed in a square. So that was an interesting question for me. And then this block of works is also all video. So they started as code-based works, but I was very interested in when you make a random work, then there's a random aspect. I often restart the work and I'm like, oh, I like this beginning better. I like this. So I was interested in containing a code-based work in a 1.5 minute perfect loop, just to try it for 2 years. And one of the things I found that compared to the works before, video works have an aspect of the internet that is very easy to send around in WhatsApp and iMessage, and it's easy to remix. And so in a way, I'm still torn a little bit between code-based works and video works. Mm-hmm. That in my head, web pages are what the internet is built on, but the modern social media era and the NFT era, people just love sharing videos, copying videos, sending them around. So I'm a little bit torn in between those two. But so the thing I noticed with NFT, and after, you could see my work before the mobile phone, and then you could see it after the mobile phone. It got even simpler. And I think these videos also have a certain focus that was simpler than what was before. So I think it's every time technology pushes you to rethink what you're doing. Yeah.
And maybe, but I'm also curious about how the whole thing of launching an NFT works.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen documentaries also that it's not just putting it online. If you do it properly, you need to have a whole entire campaign of raising a certain kind of buzz, expectation.
I think the internet has always been full of rule books and coaches, and you have to do A, B, C, D, and then you get rich quick and all that stuff. And from the beginning of the internet, I didn't know the rules and didn't follow rules, and I organically grew an audience. So I put my websites online, and back then the idea was, if you have a website, there should be links to other web pages because it's about connectivity. You should have a forum. You should have this. And my website had none of that. It was just the domain name and the work, and that's it. So, and the traffic just kept growing. And when I started with NFTs, I didn't have a direct NFT audience, and it went sky high. And then later it was a bit lower. And I remember talking to people. It's like, oh, what's your secret? How do you do it? And I was like, I don't know. I put it on Twitter. So I always focus on the work, the actual work itself.
But that's because, I mean, you are kind of pioneering the work that you did with the websites
Yeah,
already, so you had kind of a following maybe already?
The pioneer thing doesn't count in NFT world. It's very funny because as a generation we've all grown up to respect our elders, so, oh, they've been doing net art since 1852. Wow, they already had a computer then, so we must really respect it. And NFT world was just a reset of the timeline. It doesn't seem to matter, but because I've seen a lot of great work by great artists that came before me, and they have a hard time connecting with the new audience. So it's a mystery. I don't know. Yeah.
And maybe connecting a little bit to that. First of all, for the square screen we were talking about, I would like to take the opportunity to thank the Upstream Gallery that helped us out with these quite rare square screens, apparently. During the talk, now you also mentioned it's a new medium, and multiple times you refer to the fact that it's very open and everyone can participate. And so this brings me to a question that was sent in by Heracles. Are NFTs, about accessibilities.
Yeah.
And NFTs seem to make digitally produced art more popular, but do you also define it accessible? So everyone can participate. What can platform do to become more accessible? Like, is it still? Do you still need some skills to do an NFT? Will it become even more broadly accessible?
Yeah, it's a bit like podcasting. I think anyone in theory can do a podcast, but you do need a computer and a microphone, and you need some dedication to do it, and you need to upload it. And I think it's nice that there's a little bit of a barrier, because to me Instagram is so easy that there's a lot of noise, and in theory everything should be as easy as possible, but I think blockchain is very user hostile actually. It's quite hard to use, but to view the works, that's totally accessible. It depends what's your frame of reference. So if you compare, is it easier to see my work, or let's say if you want to see all the works of Joseph Albers, how would you do that? So this is a serious question. If you discover David Bowie, you can go to Spotify and listen to all the albums, all the different periods. If you want to see all the works of Picasso or Agnes Martin, you would have to travel around the world, and a lot of things are in storage. So when you talk about accessibility of viewing, I think digital art is hard to beat.
Yeah.
And then in accessibility of participating, it's a little tricky, but if someone makes animations on their iPad and then chooses to upload them to YouTube, there's a bit of a curve, and then to upload them to an NFT platform, I'd say it's pretty accessible. I think most makers, if you're comfortable using After Effects, I think you can figure out the NFT thing. But I don't think my grandma could do it.
What has the NFT done for you in terms of income? I mean, you already talked about that, like last year was very good, now not so good. For instance, like a piece like this, for how much would you sell it? How has the NFT helped you to make an income?
It was an explosion. So I think last year I maybe made 100 times more than the year before.
And how much did you make the year before?
I don't know. 100x. So it's quite severe, and it was a bit scary, and I think now it's a bit more stabilized. And when you say this year is not so good, that's not what I mean. It's less than before, but I think it's more healthy. So
like it was crazy last year, and now it's kind of getting...
Now it's reasonable, and I think the high prices were clouding there are negative sides to things going to, but I see it very similar to when mobile apps came along, and you could make millions with a fart app or something like that, and then later it stabilized and it just became more serious. So I think every time there's a new technology, maybe with VR you could make a ton of money making VR demo apps, and now it's more stable. So I think technology has these peaks, and then if you ride the wave, it's nice. But overall right now, I'm just happy. I usually start the works very low and people bid or they don't. And I'm happy if it goes low and I'm happy if it goes high. And I felt very, I strongly felt in 1999 and 2000 that this work is valuable and that it will find a place. And I felt like there would be a lot of people who are digital nomads that want to connect with culture, they want to collect, they want to support culture, but they don't want storage. And I was one of those people that I was always moving and I got rid of most of my belongings. So I felt there would be a new generation of collectors that is not interested in a climate-controlled warehouse and all that stuff. You know, and so if our interesting moments of culture are happening on the screen, then people want to connect with those and collect those. It seemed inevitable to me. It just seemed very clear, like, this is where our brain is most of the time, this is where we feel, this is where we think. So that's, if it's happening there, that's where our eyes are, that's where our attention is. So whether it's blockchain or domain names, you know, in 5 years we'll figure out something better. And maybe now it's not so user-friendly, but I see the idea of people connecting and solidifying their relationship with culture as something deeply human, and if humanity is moving online, then that will happen in some form.
And this brings me a little bit with a question. You're also talking about things of value. We could also think, and yeah, that it's maybe it's here to stay. Who knows? This brings me to a question that was sent in by Natasha. And first of all, she thanks you for a very interesting talk. And if you could expand on how to encourage art historians, or let's say more the art institution, the official history, what is accepted as things to stay. What can we do to make it more accepted as a new medium that is maybe here to stay?
I keep thinking about music. So when we think what's here to stay in terms of music, the internet also helped to resurface a lot of lost music that was very rare and people upload it. So the idea of conservation, I think we're going to follow more the model of old video games than the model of institutions. So there are communities that keep building emulators to preserve old video games. So it's more of the fan model than the top-down model. And I think fans of a certain genre of digital art will help preserve it. They will help code emulators. And I think it will be a broad... And so the question, what's important, what will be preserved, is more of a democratic model.
And how...
I think the idea of canon is not so present in music. Like, it is... Why do we see... Who was the breakthrough rock and roll artist? Is that someone... Is that defined by an institution, or is that an audience question, or is it not even relevant? Like, was Robert Johnson important? Was Lead Belly important? Which blues guitars started the rock and roll feeling? We can argue about it, but is that history book really important, or is it about a young kid just surfing Spotify and like, oh, I like this song, it means something to me?
And the moment that it's more this kind of popularity, this kind of fan base that will more and more determine what is seen, what is more popular. How did this change? I don't know, you were to open a new museum for NFT or a festival for NFT. How do you organize that around the fan base instead of around a more...
From what I've seen, the idea of culture and art has broadened so much slowly that we're not aware of it. It's the frog in warm water feeling that I think now if you would go back to 1960, it was very clear, art is in the museum, you wear a tie to the opening, and there are 3 curators, and they say, this is in, this is out. And slowly over the years, there's media festivals, maybe there are art interventions in music festivals, art starts to appear in popular television, it's becoming a part of movies, and artists work together with music videos, and every 5 years another barrier was broken. I think slowly the art world has expanded, public space, fashion collaborations with artists, and it's slowly like the overturned window expands, and I think we're going to look back and we keep saying like high and low culture are colliding, but I think at some point you're not even aware of it. Like, let's put it this way, if a rapper uses a piece of opera or classical music as a sample in their song, there's nothing shocking about it. It's like, oh, you can sample James Brown, but you could also sample Mozart, and things just happen. And we don't pause, we don't think about it. It's like, okay. And I think that's the same thing with art. Like, if Balenciaga now collaborates with an artist, that used to be something you would have to be embarrassed about as an artist, and now it's oh, they've worked with so many good artists, it's actually an interesting context, and they can take the work in a production value that you can't do in an institution, and maybe they are more attuned to technology and moving image. So it feels to me that the creative industry as a whole is becoming a bigger and bigger part of society. So I think as jobs get automated and as manufacturing is so far out of our lives, we're more of a knowledge economy, and the creative field is very expanded and very blurry, and everything's happening at the same time. So I really embrace just the idea of less structure and people making decisions for themselves. I think it's wonderful if people just decide. I hear a lot of people say, oh, I don't know anything about art, I don't have a right to say anything about it. But when they see a movie, they say exactly what they think. And that's mysterious to me. Why do you have to know all the history when you walk into an exhibition, but it's okay to talk about a movie? It's very strange.
Maybe because, well, people feel that this is something that you have to have studied for, and it's something that.
But that's a culture that that's a culture that's taught. But I think, end of the day, you're a human being, and you enter a room, and you're allowed to feel something.
And in this whole field of NFTs, is there already like differentiation styles, maybe already generations? Like, I mean, it's very young, but there are younger artists in age working now with NFTs. How do you see yourself, or what can you tell about?
Well, there are different scenes and different genres, and you have the scenes maybe around sneaker culture. You have the PFP, the profile pictures. That's a genre. There's generative, which is more technical and nerdy, which, much to my surprise, became very popular. Normally that's the niche thing, but actually a lot of people appreciate it. Each platform, all the NFT platforms have a different atmosphere. So, and I think, for example, Foundation is more subculturally oriented. A lot of different groups bond together there.
That's a website where NFTs are being sold.
And so, but I think it's still, there's a lot of room for expansion. So I think you'll see more curated platforms that focus on the high end and maybe play a more active role similar to a gallery in promoting the work. And then there are the broader platforms that are more hands-off. And you'll see, I'm doing a show in Venice with a number of NFT artists. It's a physical show where we launch NFTs. So yeah, I'm biased. Like I was making code-based digital work, and I just fell into it, and it fits me. And I see some people feel threatened by the whole phenomenon, but to me, it just seems like magic. And it's like I would make my work before, but now here's an example of these customs of higher up. When you work with a gallery, they sit down and say, "Okay, I know the best collectors. I will protect you. The work I sell will never go to auction. And I will protect as long as you follow all my decisions." And every gallerist tells you that the other gallery, you shouldn't trust them. And the whole idea is that if your work gets flipped at the auction, everything goes bad, your life is over, you're going to work at McDonald's, you'll be depressed the rest of your life because da da da. And then you enter NFT world, and it's like, no, the more people flip it, the better. And it's a bit of the pretension is gone that, oh, people should only collect the work because art is a higher thing than economics. And then here it's sort of blended with finance. It's good and it's bad, but and then there's the aftermarket, and then all of a sudden the NFT Santa Claus comes and like just brings you more money. So I like that there's a lot of things that were unsaid, but that they did happen, but we pretended they didn't happen, and it seems in NFT we just accept it for what it is.
And we are actually over time, but let's do one question. You wanted
over time already?
Yeah, time flies. I'm trying, but no, you should ask your question. But then we go to the Zoom bar.
Okay, yeah. Well, I have lots of questions, but one thing that I'm interested about is the whole the NFTs. I mean, we can explain it not just as a proof of digital ownership, but you can also, there's also provenance. You can see who the previous owners were, and you can see the value. Like that's all contained in the NFT. And I'm also very much about this flipping that you just mentioned, that it's also very much in the interest of the artist that he or she keeps promoting the NFT, because you keep earning every time it gets flipped, or how is that?
Yeah, but I really think the best promotion is making more work.
Yeah.
I think some people are clever at like retweeting and tagging the right people, but end of the day, it's the work itself. It doesn't mean it's the best work. I think there's many artists I love that wouldn't function in NFT context, and because they're interested in boredom. They only produce one work every 5 years, and it's amazing. But I think this is the internet likes frequency of publication. So I think that's, if I had any advice for anyone, is just make a new work every 2 days. I don't even do that, but that would be my tip. But
which doesn't mean that you have to make unique works, because maybe last thing to address is that you also make permutations. Maybe you can tell a little bit about how a unique NFT work differences from a permutation.
Yeah. So I've always made unique works. I thought it was an interesting contrast, because you put something online and it exists all over the world, but there's only one real in the domain name. And I like that unique sort of anchor that you say, okay, it exists right here. And so when I went into NFT, I went with the same mindset, uniques. But then this platform, Artblocks, is completely built around permutations. And I had a few works on my hard drive that I just couldn't decide what the final form should be. I think it's interesting, but I don't know, should it be red, should it be blue, should it be green? And then all of a sudden it was quite refreshing then to just let it run and let it go. So now when I sketch, I just try to sketch every day, and sometimes I'm like, this is a still image, this is a set of works, this is a unique work, and that's an intuition thing where you just feel, okay, this work should really exist on its own, and this work should be a family, and that's really something out of the core curiosity of that particular work. Where like, it's often a question of like, what do I want? You follow your curiosity. Like, what is this work bold because it's a defined final choice, or is this work bold because it goes everywhere? Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rafal. Unfortunately, I have to.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
No, thank you for the inspiring talk. A lot of food for thought. We can talk a bit more about this in the Zoom bar on the rooftop of Planet Impact.
Okay.
Yeah, we all go with a virtual drink. And last but not least, I want to take the opportunity also to thank the other members of the editorial board of IMPAKT TV, Rosa Wewes and Rhizome, that are the editors together with Arjan and me. And one last little reminder about the Art for Ukraine action. There you can find all the information under the live stream.
Another way to support the Art for Ukraine is to come to our opening. You have to be in the Netherlands. In Utrecht, we've got an opening tomorrow at 5 o'clock of disnovation.org. Post-growth is the name of the exhibition. Very much recommended. Our whole building got a total remake. You're welcome and invited to join the opening of Disnovation Post-Growth tomorrow at 5 o'clock.
Yeah, and there also all the income donations will go to Art for Ukraine. See you in the bar, the Zoom bar.
Thank you.